Good afternoon, everyone. I would like first to thank the organizers very much for this invitation. Not the first one, the second invitation. I was asked to speak about censorship and self-censorship, not in Europe, but in the West. So I know that my colleague and friend, Martin, will speak precisely on Europe and mostly on religious freedom, so I will focus just to combine and complete mostly on freedom of speech. Ladies and gentlemen, the intervention of the US Vice President Vance at the 61st Munich Security Conference in February this year highlighted, and I quote, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, including freedom of speech. His statements were badly received by European leaders, including mainstream liberal media, that call it, and I quote, a brutal ideological assault on Europe. This was The Guardian, British newspaper. An ideological war on Europe. This was Le Monde in France. Or simply cynical, the Spanish El País. Few notable exceptions are worth mentioning. For example, The Economist. The Economist finished its article titled, Europe's Free Speech Problem. D.G. Vance was right. This was the title of The Economist. And gave some advice. I quote, Europeans should not ignore his warning. When states have too much power over speech, sooner or later they will use them. End of quote. I really hate to say it, but I agree with J.D. Vance, by The Guardian commentator Mahawi, also brought some honesty to the debate. The cases quoted by Vance were not anecdotal. The British Army veteran arrested for silently praying for his aborted child in front of a clinic, the buffer zones in Scotland, the criminalization of offending Muslims and their sacred book in Sweden. These are examples of a broader reality and not cherry-picking incidents that distort the picture of human rights in Europe. Tens of thousands, and I repeat, tens of thousands of Europeans have already been victims of threatening legislations and practices by police forces and courts that are rapidly eroding freedom of expression, of assembly, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, academic freedom, among other human rights. Vague and arbitrary legislation such as that of hate speech criminalizes European law-abiding, binding ordinary citizens that express critical views on migration, Islam, Muslim, gender ideology, abortion, no matter how factual or respectful they might be. According to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, it is Islamophobic any hostile behavior against Muslims, their scripture, holy personalities, symbols, and religious centers. The UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims defines Islamophobia as, I quote, a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. These expansive notions have been weaponized. Today, anyone proferring critiques of Sharia, manifesting incompatibility with international human rights law, or saying that certain Islamic text interpretation, the so-called Medina Surahs, could lead to justification of violence, risks being accused of Islamophobia. In Spain, the Catholic priest from Barcelona, Custodio Ballester, faced 3 years imprisonment, accused of hate speech for an article entitled The Impossible Dialogue with Islam, where he criticized radical Islam, and its tendency to impose its dogmas. The criminal charges were introduced in 2020, and the hearing took place 5 years later, 5 years without trial, after which he has been declared innocent. Similarly, gender ideology is a powerful tool to legally impose a system of thought that denies fundamental freedoms of dissenters. The EU Fundamental Rights Agency describes, I quote, disrespectful public discourse regarding LGBT as a form of gender-based hate speech. Even the expression gender ideology has been labeled as hateful because it allegedly demonized LGBT people. 14 Spanish Catholic bishops have been accused of homophobia just for expressing their views based on their church moral doctrine. pastoral religious accompanying of individuals with homosexual tendencies has been abusively included in the notion of conversion therapy, and priests could be banned to give advice or just to witness what the Church says on the matter. In this context, the public prosecutor of Madrid opened some days ago an investigation to another Catholic bishop in Spain, Bishop Munilla, for his statements on the Christian vision of love and respect of sexuality. And this is ongoing. State speech restriction in Western Europe targets citizens whose offense is mostly voicing opposition to government policies. The vast majority of them are neither violent nor extremist. However, we see how their homes are raided and some are arrested just for online posts. And this is not an exaggeration. Germany has created 16 online hate speech task forces across the country. And one of them, the Lower Saxony unit, composed by 9 investigators, processed around 3,500 cases a year and has been able to successfully prosecute 750 hate speech cases over the last 4 years. Germany is one of the European countries that has gone farther than any other Western democracy to prosecute individuals for what they say online, testing the limits of free speech in the internet. A headline of The Economist, again, exposed the seal of this battle against freedom of speech online in Germany. The headline was, "Germany is silencing hate speech but cannot define it." Some years later, another headline of The Economist again, "The threat to free speech in Germany." It's not a surprise that 84% of Germans believe that freedom of expression is being curtailed in their country, affecting supporters of all political ideologies from right to left. The far left-wing government of the Spanish socialist Sánchez created the Spanish Observatory of Racism and Xenophobia to allegedly monitor hate speech. According to its figures, only in one year since January to August this year, 25, they detected 600,000 messages of this nature, and 200,000 were just withdrawn. However, 65 of these messages, so-called hate messages, only denounce citizen insecurity, no more than that, regarding uncontrolled migration, and 16% of them are critical messages regarding subsidies, social and political aid to the government immigration. Only 8% are related to violent expressions. The European Court of Human Rights has held in a consolidated jurisprudence that freedom of expression protects information and ideas that, I quote, shock, offend, or disturb the state or a part of the population. Shock, offend, or disturb. This is inside freedom of expression. However, it seems that this is not the case anymore in Europe. In the UK, police forces made 12,000 arrests only in 2023 for offensive posts and messages. 12,000 arrests. A BBC report from April 25 specified that a total of 133,000 non-crime hate incidents. No, I'm not talking about hate crime. I'm talking about non-crime hate incidents. And what is this? These are words of acts perceived by the victim or another person as being motivated by hostility or prejudice towards a personal characteristic, but they don't meet the threshold for a criminal offense. So they are not criminal acts, but the police go to your place and says, look, there was somebody offended, so it's better you not to go in that line. In England and Wales, a report commissioned by the Commission for Countering Extremism showed that around 3 in 10 citizens tend to feel they need to hold back expressing their opinions when it comes to certain issues. A Pew Research report showed that in France, 38% of the population think that people are not free to say what they want. Academic freedom and artistic freedom have been also weakened in Europe. In the Netherlands, a report showed that in disciplines such as economy, behavior, society, and law, a quarter of teachers applied self-censorship in talks with the students in the past 3 years. Students in almost all fields do the same when in contact with teachers and fellow students. But this is not an exception, but the trend in most of European countries. Many higher education scholars in the UK practice self-censorship over fears to be targeted by peers or students. A study among history teachers of Germany, Austria, France, Italy, and the Netherlands evidenced that, and I quote, "The issues that dominated responses from all countries about avoidance or hesitation to teach included Islam and religion in general," end of quotation. In France, the assassination of teacher Samuel Paty and Dominique Bernard by Islamic terrorists reinforced the fear to speak freely. Now, 48 of the French teachers declare that they self-censor to avoid incidents with their students. And this proportion rises up to 65% in the banlieue, let's say in the most disadvantaged areas of the big cities. 1 in 5 British school teachers self-censor for fear of offending Muslim pupils. And more worryingly, to the question, if someone is using hate speech or making racially charged comments, physical violence can be justified to prevent this person from espousing their hateful views. To this question, or to this statement, 26% of UK students agreed that violence is legitimate. However, none of these threats are mentioned in institutional reports and academic reports in Europe. For example, the 2024 European Parliament Academic Freedom Monitor report denounces restrictions on gender, LGBT studies, migration, rendering totally invisible academic censorship and self-censorship affecting those defending natural family, marriage, biological sex, or national ethos. Similarly, gender ideology is eroding artistic creation. 84% of British artists say that they cannot anymore express freely their opinions, mostly criticizing gender ideology. I have 1.5 minutes. I'll try to do my best. Criticism against abortion is a taboo. The defense of the human condition of the unborn child by the Belgian philosopher Stéphane Mercier provoked his dismissal, very ironically, from the Catholic University of Leuven, whose representatives claim that the view of Mercier that abortion was an assassination was not aligned with its values. I'm talking about the Catholic University of Leuven. Professional ostracism is the end of academic dissenters, and heavy sanctions are for independent media. For example, a French TV channel was fined with 100,000 euros for saying that abortion is the first cause of death. 100,000 euros of fine. For medical staff, it's even worse. For example, compulsory state registration of conscientious objectors to abortion. That's a reality in Spain. Instead of registering pro-abortion doctors that they freely volunteer, the government imposes mandatory declaration to conscientious objectors in breach of their right not to reveal their moral beliefs. I will skip some of the things. I just will mention a couple of final comments if I'm allowed to have 1 minute more. There is one EU legislation, the so-called Digital Service Act, DSA. Maybe some of you have heard about that. This act obliges providers of very large online platforms such as X, TikTok, Facebook, and large online search engines like Google to detect and neutralize systemic risks. But the risks are a long list of risks. Dissemination of illegal content, attacks on the integrity of civic discourse, what's that? Public security, gender-based violence, protection of public health and minors, serious negative consequences to the person's physical and mental well-being. Well, these speech restrictions are made through proxies, through the companies. The US House of Committee on the Judiciary in July this year made a report and stated the following. The EU DSA serves as a tool of global censorship for its potential extraterritorial application. and accused, and I quote, governments, including the EU, to weaponize the terms disinformation, hate speech, to censor their political opponents and criticism from their constituents, including memes and other forms of satire. I will finalize with a couple of sentences. Europol, the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, warned in its report on artificial intelligence and policy in that, and I quote, the use of AI for content moderation presents a complex challenge, particularly regarding the balance between the right to freedom of expression and freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and the imperative to counter disinformation, hate speech, and illicit content online. This balance is delicate, as the deployment of AI might inadvertently curtail legitimate expressions under the guise of content moderation, posing a threat to this fundamental freedom. I will just mention the question of vandalism that I think that Martin will also mention. I will some figures. Over 9,000 crimes were reported at UK churches. 9,000 crimes against churches in the UK between 22 and 24. It's very well known the average 1,000 cases of attacks against Christian sites and faithful in France. Lamfalussy, a journalist in Belgium, made a report arguing that 200 churches are vandalized in the small country of Belgium. Very peaceful country, 200 per year. In Germany, a total of more than 100 attacks against churches in 24. In the United States, 537 attacks against Catholic churches only, temples. In Canada, 123. So we see that vandalism is becoming an epidemic in the West, and evidence not only of incivility, but a dangerous trend that erodes religious freedom of Christians, making them vulnerable. And most of the international media contribute to it through their lack of reporting or watering down its relevance to the veil of silence in the West on the attacks of Christians. Thank you very much also for giving me 3 minutes more.
Danke.